Hello, and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of The Star Beast by Robert Heinlein. Our human protagonist, John Thomas, has been forced to sell his beloved pet, Lummox, in order to save him from being destroyed by the local law enforcement. Chapter 8. The Sensible Thing to Do. John Thomas stayed with Lummox a short time only, as he could not bear to tell him the truth, and there was nothing else to talk about. Lummox sensed his distress and asked questions. At last John Thomas pulled himself together and said, "There's nothing wrong, I tell you. Shut up and go to sleep. And be darn sure you stay in the yard, or I'll beat you bow-legged."
"Yes, Johnny, I don't like it outside anyway. People did funny things."
"Just remember that and don't do it again."
"I won't, Johnny. Cross my heart."
John Thomas went in and up to bed, but he did not go to sleep. After a while he got up, dressed in part, and went up to the attic. The house was very old and had a real garret reached by a ladder and scuttle hole in an upper hallway closet. Once there had been a proper staircase, but it had been squeezed out when the landing flat was built on the roof, and the space had been needed for the lazy lift. But the attic was still there, and it was John Thomas's only private place. His room his mother tidied sometimes, even though it was his duty and wish to do it himself. Anything might happen when Mum tidied. Papers might be lost, destroyed, or even read. For Mum believed that there should be no secrets between parents and children. So, anything he wanted to keep to himself, he kept in the attic. Mum never went there. Ladders made her dizzy. He had a small, almost airless, and very dirty room there, which he was supposed to use only for storage. Its actual uses were varied. He had raised snakes there some years before. There he kept the small collection of books which every boy comes by but does not discuss with his parents. He even had a telephone there, an audio extension run from the usual sound and sight instrument in his bedroom. This last was a practical result of his high school course in physics, and it had been real work to wire it, as it not only had to be rigged when Mum was out of the house and in such a way that she would not notice it, but also it had to be done so as not to advertise its presence to the phone company's technicians. But it worked, jury-rigged though it was, and he had added a servant circuit which flashed a warning light if anyone was listening from any other instrument in the house. Tonight he had no wish to call anyone, and it was past the hour when direct messages were permitted at the dormitory where Betty lived. He simply wanted to be alone, and to look over some papers he had not looked at in a long time. He fumbled under his work table, flipped a toggle. A panel opened in what appeared to be a blank wall. In the cupboard thus exposed were books and papers. He took them out. One item was a thin paper notebook, his great-grandfather's diary of the Trailblazers' second voyage of exploration. It was more than 100 years old, and showed the wear of many hands. John Thomas had read it a dozen times. He supposed that his father and his grandfather had done the same. All the pages were fragile. Many had been repaired. He thumbed through it, turned to the pages carefully, but browsing rather than reading. His eye lit on one remembered item. "Some of the lads are panicky, especially the married men, but they should have thought of it before they signed up. Everybody knows the score now. We burst through and came out somewhere not close to home. Who cares? We meant to travel, didn't we?" John Thomas turned a few more pages. He had always known the story of the Trailblazer. It produced in him neither awe nor wonder. One of the first interstellar ships, her crew had plied the profession of discovery with the same acceptance of the unknown that had marked the golden days of the 15th century, when men had braved uncharted seas in wooden vessels. The Trailblazer and her sisters had gone out the same way, burst through the Einstein barrier, taken their chances on getting back. John Thomas Stewart VIII had been aboard her that second voyage, had come home in one piece, married, begat a male child, and settled down. It was he who had built the landing flat on the roof. Then, one night, he had heard the call of the wild goose, signed up again, and he had not come back. John Thomas located the first mention of Lummox. This planet is a fair imitation of good old Terra, which is a relief after the last three, since we can hit dirt without suiting up. But evolution must have been playing double or nothing here, because instead of four-limbed arrangements considered stylish at home, practically everything here has at least 8 legs. Mice that look like centipedes, rabbit-like creatures with 6 short legs and 1 pair of tremendous jumping legs, all sorts of things up to the size of giraffes. Caught one little fella, if you can call it that. Fact is, he came up and crawled into my lap, and I was so taken with him that I'm going to try and keep him as a mascot. He puts me in mind of a dachshund puppy, only better engineered. Christie had the airlock watch, so I was able to get him aboard without turning him over to biology. The next day's entry did not mention Lummox, being concerned with a more serious matter. We hit the jackpot this time, civilization. The officers are so excited they almost off their heads. I've seen one of the dominant race at the distance. Same multi-legged pattern, but otherwise makes you wonder what would have happened on Earth if the dinosaurs had made good. Still further on, I've been wondering what to feed Cuddlepup. I needn't have worried. He likes everything I've sneaked out of the mess for him, but he will eat anything that is not riveted down. Today he ate my stylus, and that has me worried. I don't suppose the ink cartridge will poison him, but how about the metal and plastic? He's just like a baby. Everything he can reach goes in his mouth. Cuddlepup gets cuter every day. The little tyke seems to be trying to talk. He whines at me, and I whine back at him. Then he crawls into my lap and tells me he loves me plain as anything. I'll be switched if I'll let biology have him, even if they catch me. Those birds would likely as not cut him up just to see what makes him tick. He trusts me, and I'm not going to let him down. John Thomas, Jr. had not gone to sea. Instead, he had killed himself flying a box kite affair termed an aeroplane. That had been before the first of the World Wars. For several years thereafter, the house had received paying guests. John Thomas Stewart III had died to greater purpose. The submarine of which he was the gunnery officer had penetrated Tsushima Straits in the Sea of Japan, but had failed to return. John Thomas Stewart IV was killed on a trip to the moon. John Thomas V had emigrated to Mars. His son, the famous name in the family, Johnny skipped over quickly. He had long since grown tired of being reminded that he bore the same name as General Stewart, first governor of the Martian Commonwealth after the Revolution. Johnny wondered what would have happened to his great-great-great-grandfather if the revolution had failed. Would they have hanged him instead of putting up statues to him? Much of the book was devoted to an attempt by Johnny's grandfather to clear the name of his own grandfather, for the son of General Stewart was no public hero. Instead, he had sweated out his last 15 years of life in the Triton penal colony. His wife had returned to Earth with her family and had taken back her maiden name for herself and her son. But her son had gone proudly into court the day he was of age and had his name changed from Carlton Gimmage to John Thomas Stewart VIII. It was he who had fetched Lummox back, and he had used his bonus money from the second trip to the Trailblazer to buy back the old homestead. He had apparently impressed on his own son that his son's grandfather had gotten a dirty deal. The son had made a great point of it in this record. Johnny's grandfather could himself have used an advocate to defend his name. The record stated simply that John Thomas Stewart IX had resigned from the service and had never gone into space again. But Johnny knew that it had been a choice of that or a court-martial. His own father had told him. But he had told him also that his grandfather could have got off scot-free if he had been willing to testify. His father had added, "Johnny, I'd rather see you loyal to your friends than with your chest decked out in medals." The old man had still been living at the time Johnny's father told him this. On a later occasion, while Johnny's father was out on patrol, Johnny had tried to let him know that he knew. Granddad had been furious. "Poppycock!" he had shouted. "They had me dead to rights." "But Dad said your skipper was actually the one who—" "Your dad wasn't there. Captain Dominic was the finest skipper that ever trod steel. May his soul rest in peace. Set up the chuckers, son. I'm going to beat you." Johnny had tried to get the straight of it after his grandfather died, but his father's answer was not direct. "Your grandfather was a romantic sentimentalist, Johnny. It's a flaw in our makeup. Hardly sense enough in the whole line to balance a checkbook." He had puffed his pipe and added, "But we do have fun." Johnny put the books and papers away, feeling dully that it had not done him much good to read about his forebears. Lummox was still on his mind. He guessed he ought to go down and try to get some sleep. He was turning away as the phone flashed. He grabbed it before the light could change to sound. He did not want his mother to wake. "Yes? That you, Johnny?" "Yeah, I can't see you, Betty. I'm up in the attic." "That isn't the only reason you can't. I haven't got my face on, so I've got the video switched off. Besides, it's pitch dark in this hallway since I'm not allowed to phone this time of night. The Duchess isn't listening, is she?" Johnny glanced at his warning signal. "No." "I'll make this brief. My spies report that Deacon Dressier got the okay to go ahead." "No!" "Yes. Point is, what do we do about it? We can't sit still and let him." I've done something." "What? Nothing silly, I hope? I shouldn't have been away today." "Well, at Mr. Perkins." "Perkins? The chap who went to see Judge O'Farrell tonight?" "Yes. How did you know? Look, don't waste time. I always know. Tell me your end." "Well—" John Thomas gave a confused report. Betty listened without comment, which made him defensive. He found himself expounding the viewpoints of his mother and of Mr. Perkins rather than his own. "So that's how it was," he finished lamely. "So you told them to go climb a tree? Good. Now here's our next move. If the museum can do it, we can do it. It's just a case of getting Grandpa O'Farrell to—" "Betty, you don't understand. I sold Lummox." "What? You sold Lummox?" "Yes, I had to. If I didn't—" "You sold Lummox?" "Betty, I couldn't help my—" But she had switched off on him. He tried to call back, got a recorded voice that said, "This instrument is out of direct service until tomorrow morning at 8. If you wish to record a message, stand by for—" He switched off. He sat holding his head and wishing he were dead. The worst of it was, Betty was right. He had let himself be badgered into doing something he knew was wrong just because it had seemed that there was nothing else he could do. Betty had not been fooled. Maybe what she wanted to try wasn't any good either, but she had known a wrong answer when she heard it. He sat there, flailing himself, but not knowing what to do. The more he thought, the angrier he got. He'd let himself be talked into something that wasn't right, just because it was reasonable, just because it was logical, just because it was common sense. The deuce with common sense. His ancestors hadn't used common sense, any of them. Who was he to start such a practice? None of them had ever done the sensible thing. Why, take his great-great-great-grandfather. He'd found a situation he hadn't liked, and he'd turned a whole planet upside down through 7 bloody years. Sure, they called him a hero, but does starting a revolution come under the head of common sense? Or take any of them. There hadn't been a good boy in the bunch. Would Granddad have sold Lummox? Why, Granddad would have torn down the courthouse with his bare hands. If Granddad was here, he'd be standing guard over Lummox with a gun and daring the world to touch one's spine. He certainly wasn't going to take any of Perkins' dirty money. He knew that. But what could he do? He could go to Mars. Under the Lafayette law, he was a citizen and could claim land. But how could he get there? Worse, how could he get Lummox there? The trouble with that, he told himself savagely, is that it almost makes sense. And sense is no use to me. At last he hit on a plan. It had the one virtue of having no sense to it at all. It was a compound of equal parts folly and risk. He felt that Granddad would have liked it. Chapter 9. Customs and an Ugly Duckling. He went down the upper hallway and listened at his mother's door. He did not expect to hear anything, as her bedroom was soundproofed. The action was instinctive. Then he returned to his own room and made rapid preparations, starting by dressing in camping clothes and mountain boots. His sleeping bag he kept in a drawer of his desk. He got it out, tucked it in a side pocket of his coat, and shoved its power pack in a breast pocket. Other items of hiking and camping gear he distributed among other pockets, and he was almost ready to go. He counted his cash and swore softly. His other assets were in a savings account, and now he would have no chance to draw from it. Well, it couldn't be helped. He started downstairs, then remembered an important matter. He went back to his desk. "Dear Mum," he wrote, "please tell Mr. Perkins that the deal is off. You can use my college money to pay back the insurance people. Lum and I are going away, and it won't do any good to try to find us. I'm sorry, but we have to." He looked at the note, decided there was no more to be said, added "Love," and signed it. He started a note to Betty, tore it up, tried again, and finally told himself he would send her a letter when he had more to say. He went downstairs, left the note on the dining table, then went to the pantry and picked out supplies. A few minutes later, carrying a large sack crammed with tins and packages, he went out to Lummox's house. His friend was asleep. The watchman eye accepted him. Lummox did not stir. John Thomas hauled back and kicked him as hard as possible. "Hey, Lum, wake up!" The beast opened his other eyes, yawned daintily, and piped,
"Hello, Johnny."
"Pull yourself together, we're going for a hike." Lummox extended his legs and stood up, letting a ripple run from head to stern.
"All right."
"Make me a seat, and leave room for this." Johnny held up the bag of groceries. Lummox complied without comment. John Thomas chucked the sack up onto the beast, then scrambled up himself. Soon they were on the road in front of the Stewart house. Almost irrational as he was, John Thomas nevertheless knew that running away and hiding Lummox was a project almost impossible. Lummox anywhere would be about as conspicuous as a bass drum in a bathtub. However, there was a modicum of method in his madness. Concealing Lummox near Westville was not quite the impossibility it would have been some places. Westville lay in an open mountain valley, immediately west of the backbone of the continent as it shoved its gaunt ridges into the sky. A few miles beyond the city commenced one of the great primitive areas, thousands of square miles of up and down country, almost the same as it had been when the Indians sighted Columbus. During a short season each year, it swarmed with red-coated sportsmen blazing away at deer and elk and each other. Most of the year it was deserted. If he could get Lummox there without being seen, it was barely possible that they could avoid being caught until his food supplies ran out. When that time came, well, he might live off the country just as Lummox would, eat venison maybe. Or maybe go back to town without Lummox and argue it out again from a strong position of being able to refuse to tell where Lummox was until they listened to reason. The possibilities were not thought out. He simply intended to get Lummox under cover and then think about it. Get him somewhere where that old scoundrel Dressier couldn't try out ways to hurt him. John Thomas could have turned Lummox to the west and set off across country toward the mountains, Lummox being no more dependent on pavement than is a tank. But Lummox left a track in soft earth as conspicuous as that of a tank. It was necessary to stay on paved road. Johnny had a solution in mind. In an earlier century, a transcontinental highway had crossed the mountains here, passing south of Westville and winding ever higher toward the Great Divide. It had long since been replaced by a modern powered road, which tunneled through the wall of rock instead of climbing it. But the old road remained, abandoned, overgrown in many places, its concrete slabs heaved and tilted from frost and summer heat, but still a paved road that would show little sign of Lummox's ponderous progress. He led Lummox by back ways, avoiding houses and working toward a spot 3 miles west where the expressway entered the first of its tunnels and the old highway started to climb. He did not go quite to the fork, but stopped 100 yards short, parked Lummox in front of a vacant lot, warned him not to move, and scouted the lay of the land. He did not dare take Lummox onto the expressway to reach the old road. Not only might they be seen, but also it would be dangerous to Lummox. But John Thomas found what he thought he remembered, a construction road looping around the junction. It was not paved, but it was hard-packed granite gravel, and he judged that even Lummox's heavy steps would not leave prints. He went back and found Lummox placidly eating a for sale sign. He scolded him and took it away, then decided he might as well get rid of the evidence and gave it back. They continued while Lummox munched the sign. Once on the old highway, John Thomas relaxed. For the first few miles it was in good repair, for it served homes farther up the canyon. But there was no through traffic, it being a dead end, and no local traffic at this hour. Once or twice an air car passed overhead, party or theater goers returning home, but if the passengers noticed the great beast plodding on the road below, they gave no sign. The road meandered up the canyon and came out on a tableland. Here was a barrier across the pavement. Road closed. Vehicular passage forbidden beyond this point. Johnny got down and looked it over. It was a single heavy timber supported at chest height. "Lummy, can you walk over that without touching it?"
Sure, Johnny.
"All right, take it slowly. You mustn't knock it down. Don't even brush against it."
I won't, Johnny.
Nor did he. Instead of stepping over it as a horse might step over a lower barrier, Lummox retracted pairs of legs in succession and flowed over it. Johnny crawled under the barrier and joined him. "I didn't know you could do that."
Neither did I.
The road was rough ahead. Johnny stopped to lash down the groceries with a line under Lummox's keel, then added a bite across his own thighs. "All right, Lummy, let's have some speed, but don't gallop. I don't want to fall off."
Hang on, Johnny.
Lummox picked up speed, regaining his normal foot pattern. He rumbled along at a fast trot, his gait smoothed out by his many legs. Johnny found that he was very tired, both in body and spirit. He felt safe now that they were away from houses and traveled roads, and fatigue hit him. He leaned back and Lummox adjusted his contours to him. The swaying motion and steady pounding of massive feet had soothing effect. Presently he slept. Lummox went on sure-footedly over the broken slabs. He was using his night sight, and there was no danger of stumbling in the dark. He knew that Johnny was asleep and kept his gait as smooth as possible. But in time he got bored and decided on a nap too. He had not slept well the nights he had spent away from home. Always some silliness going on, and it had fretted him not knowing where Johnny was. So he rigged out his guardian eye, closed his others, and shifted control over to the secondary brain back in his rump. Lummox proper went to sleep, leaving that minor fraction that never slept to perform the simple tasks of watching for road hazards and of supervising the tireless pounding of his 8 great legs. And we'll see where a sleepwalking alien monster gets to next time.